life is not all about how much money you're making. If you can feel really good about getting a tenant in a space that works for them and they're paying a good or they're paying a rent that works for their business, now you have a friend for the rest of your life. And that's incredibly valuable.
Welcome to Dirt NC, where we talk all about the places and spaces of North Carolina and the people who make them awesome. I am your host, Jed Byrne. Throughout my career in engineering, construction, finance, and development, I've covered just about all sides of the land use ecosystem. This show creates an opportunity for me to share what I have learned with you, as well as to introduce you to some of my friends, both new and old, who are doing transformative work. With each episode of Dirt NC, my goal is to make sure you walk away learning something new about land use. I promise to keep it simple and straight to the point. If you ever have a question for me, please reach out to me on Twitter at OakCityCRE. Now let's jump in. I recently had the chance to chat with David Meeker all about retail development and operations in Raleigh. We even get into road design and transportation. I appreciate David's perspective as a retail business owner and landlord, which is a pretty unique combination. A Raleigh native, David Meeker founded Carpenter Development and partnered with the Trophy Brewing team in 2008. He has made just about every mistake in the world and lived to tell about it, and has invaluable development experience because of that. David is on the board of the Raleigh Chamber, Downtown Raleigh Alliance, Common Cause NC, North Carolinians for Redistricting Reform, Dix Park, the Dogwood Bank Advisory Board, and ArtSpace. He is also on the Capital Campaign Committee for Healing Transitions, a detox and recovery center on Dix Park. David lives in downtown Raleigh with his wife and two boys.
My name's David Meeker, and I am the managing partner of Carpenter Development company in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm also the co-owner of Trophy Brewing. I'm one of the co-owners of Trophy Brewing. We have 4 locations in downtown Raleigh. And then I also consider myself a community organizer on different community issues. And then I live in downtown Raleigh with my wife and 2 sons who are 2 and 4 years old.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're here today to talk a bit about retail and your experience there. Can you take me back kind of to the beginning of what was your first retail experience?
Yeah. So I think the reason I've been asked on this was because I have experience on the retailer side, the development side. I've had wins and I've had losses, and I'm going to try and hit all of them. My first retail experience was owning a craft beer bar called the Busy Bee Cafe, and we opened in 2009. That business was a success. It took us 6 or 8 months to really figure it out, but pretty quickly, we were busy and making money there. So I got lucky that my first retail experience was a win. On the other side, I was a partner in a running store called Raleigh that was on Hillsborough Street in downtown Raleigh. And that wasn't a success, partly because of the amount of business we could do in that location and the amount of rent we had to pay for that location. And we, honestly just lost money there. So I've been there. I've also owned buildings where we've had tenants who have had varying levels of success. And a couple examples of those, we own the Beasley's Chicken and Honey building in downtown Raleigh, where our tenant is incredibly successful. We are also involved with buildings where our tenants aren't as successful. And I'm not going to mention those because I don't want to put our tenants on the spot, but sort of have all angles at this issue.
What about, was there an experience or a memory or an interaction with the retail, either retail business or the development side? Like, what was your first, was there a time or an experience that made you want to do this? I mean, going back and saying, hey, so as you started, there's a vision forward and said, this is what I want our retail to be like. I mean, did you have inspirations or experiences that led you down this path?
Yes. And the reason was sort of the business model of it. If you are in real estate development, you have a great retirement plan. You pay off the mortgage over time. It goes up, the building goes up in value, and you sort of build wealth long term. But a lot of times there's not a short term sort of cash flow way to make money. And so when I was going out on my own in development, and that was my long term goal, I needed a way to pay my bills year to year. And that's why I got involved with the craft beer bar, the Busy Bee Cafe, and that has now turned into the Trophy Brewing company. And that allows me flexibility on my real estate development projects where they don't have to make money as quickly for me to pay my bills. So that was the reason I got into it. It wasn't like a passion for retail, although I will say, once you're in it, you get really passionate about it. And some of the things I get most excited about are related to trophy brewing. And it's generally not about trying to make money. Being involved with retail concepts, really, your feet are on the ground. You have a pulse for the city. You are helping nonprofits and community causes a lot of the time. And I am very involved with that world in Raleigh, and I love it. And I think I would not be nearly as involved if I were not involved with the retail stuff and I was only a real estate developer.
So what is it about that role? I mean, so right, retail, small business owner, local focus, but what is it about that role that kind of sparks that passion?
Yeah, well, you're just so connected. When you're operating a retail business, one, you have all the challenges of that, and you know what's going on in town related to that. And then two, you're just interacting with so many people day to day that when there's something going wrong, you're not in your office on the 7th floor of a building, working away, riding the elevator to the parking garage and driving home to hang out with your family. It's just, life's not that easy. And I know some people do like having an easy life, and there's certainly times to do that. But I think it's more interesting to be involved with the day-to-day struggles of what most people in the real world deal with. And I think that's how you sort of see the struggles and you get engaged with them, because once you see a problem, you've got to be a part of fixing it. And then it just keeps you in the loop. And in the end, you win because you live a more fulfilling life instead of an easy life.
That's interesting. And right, I mean, I think it's your proximity, right? So you see out onto the street sees into you.
Well, here's one example. Today is Wear Orange Day, which is Gun Violence Prevention Day, and I think in the country. And that's an issue that I care about, but wouldn't necessarily, be that engaged with just, if I were in real estate development. But because I own a restaurant where a lot of people gather, where we do events, where we have hundreds of people at a time, we have had to worry about mass shootings, right? And we've had to make plans. So because of that, I am much more engaged with the gun violence prevention issue than I would be otherwise, because it's become personal. And then now I'm working with groups outside of my restaurants on that cause too. And there are 10 examples of causes like that I now know about or am much more aware of than I would be, because I'm so close to the issue.
And is that, I mean, so one of the things I'd like to get into, and you've hinted at challenges and kind of, I think there's highs and lows, benefits and challenges to being in retail, but how does, I mean, tell me some more about some of those challenges, and maybe they're related to the primary focus of the business, right? The restaurant, the shop, or a secondary, not in importance, but right, there's the primary, like this is a restaurant, we're here to serve food, but by serving food, you're interacting with people. So tell me some more about some of those challenges and benefits of being in the business as it relates to what you've done.
Yeah. Okay. So the biggest challenge in retail is doing enough business. So having enough density nearby or enough customers coming to you, and balancing that out with rent. A lot of landlords try to charge the same amount of rent, or sometimes even more, for the first floor space than they charge for the upper floors. To me, it should be the opposite. Look at the retail as an amenity. Give your retail tenants a break in exchange for providing a service to the bigger building. And that would, if your tenants pay less rent, then they will make more money and they are more likely to stay long term. The retail businesses I'm involved with that are busy and successful will be there forever. The running shoe store that was on Hillsborough Street, that where the rent was too high for the amount of business we could do, it's moved. to cheaper rent. And it's successful where it is. It's not rocket science. It's actually way more successful now in a new location. And I'm not involved with it anymore. Yeah. So the key is retail needs to be looked at as an amenity to a project into town. And we need to subsidize it by giving it lower rents. The second thing I'll say is you need to have the right type of retail. And that really depends on the project. At least in downtown areas, there's been a lot more success with chef-driven restaurants or community-oriented breweries or that kind of thing versus corporate chains. And if you get these anchors, these chef-driven restaurants or these cool local concepts, then other good retail or service-oriented retail can fill in next to it and can do fine too. But you've really got to have the anchors. And I've seen that personally, and I've seen the really smart big developers who can afford to do what they want are doing that now. And a great example in this area is Fenton out in Cary. They have basically gone to all the best chefs in Raleigh and Durham and said, we're going to get you to come out to Fenton and be the anchor, the chef-driven local restaurant, not the steakhouse national chain or whatever. They're giving them a lot of TI and they're giving them a good rent rate in exchange for being an amenity in their development. And then they'll have national retailers like clothing retailers fill in next to them, like, Lululemon and that kind of thing. And then of course the apartments and office and hotel upstairs can sort of pay for the development as well. But the equation of how many people are going to be there shopping and what the rent is need to work. And that's the biggest issue I've seen is when landlords try to get too much out of the retail and in exchange the tenants end up leaving.
So two things, and then I'd like to dance with, I'll put my developer hat back on and kind of dance with this topic a little bit. But on that note, if you're a landlord yourself, developer, operator, retailer, I mean, there's only so much you can do about how many people, if you're on a street, how many people travel that street, right? That you're part of that equation, but you're not in control of foot traffic. You're not in control of offices and residences downtown, right? You're part of an ecosystem. So what, if anything, in your experience, have you seen that helps have you maybe have a little bit more control as an operator or as a developer to positively influence the environment that you're operating in so that you do get more? Because again, it's if your tenants are doing better, you as a landlord, you're doing better. That's simple math, right? If you're a retailer, you've got a cost that is your goods and services and your rent, and you've got revenue, right? And so as long as the revenue outstrips the costs, you can keep going. But if it doesn't, you got a problem. So what? And then we'll also go back to, you mentioned kind of a way of thinking about tenants and as an amenity versus squeezing the screws down on rent
versus being a moneymaker. I mean, a couple of thoughts on how you get business to your building if you're not on Main Street or whatever. And I think you just have to be thoughtful about it. There may be some retail spaces that need to be occupied by offices versus having 3 restaurants in one building, for example. So one is just know your location and get concepts on the first floor there that are somewhat active, but also can be successful. And then 2 is the easy one, and it's the rent. If you are not in as good a location, I think you should be charging less rent to get a good concept in your place. And what you do is, for example, if the normal rent on a first floor space would be $30 a square foot, reduce that to 20, something very significant, and then charge a tiny bit more for the 5 or 6 stories above them, because those tenants upstairs, office or residential, will be much happier living there and much more likely to stay if there's a cool coffee shop or a cool restaurant or another cool place to shop down on the first floor.
So you brought this as a perfect segue to go back and put my developer hat on, right? And say, okay, well, doesn't the market take care of that, right? If you're not in as good a location, aren't you not going to be able to, if you're not Main Street and Main Street is getting $30 a foot, if you're 2 blocks off, aren't you naturally going to have to charge $20 to your tenants because you can't charge, because again, nobody would lease it at $30.
Yeah. Well, I see that's true. And that's sort of long-term, broad base. But I see a lot of developers leasing their space for as much as they can get to whoever will take it. And in the end, the developer loses because the business is not successful, may not pay rent or eventually leaves. And then there's some vacancy. It's also bad for the rest of their development. You also now have a tenant who's tried to do a business and it hasn't worked. And I think most developers feel bad when that happens. So that's another reason not to do it. So I think if I'm giving advice to other developers is don't let the market figure it out. You figure it out and you create a better deal for the retail than your neighbor. And in exchange, charge a tiny bit more for the upstairs unit and your project will be much better off.
And is your argument then also, if you're saying, okay, well, if you're charging, again, in the $20-$30 example, if you're charging $20, your vacancy is going to be 0% year over year. Your long-term TI and recycling the space, instead of having to do 10 every 3 years and having to put $40, $50, $100 back into the space to re-tenant it, your tenant upfit costs long-term are less, right? I mean, is that the argument? So and again, a discounted cash flow back to zero, if you look out in the next 10 years, you're actually doing better by having the right fit and charging a lower rent that affords that?
Definitely. And those are all definitely true. And then also you have more time because you're not dealing with searching for a tenant or renegotiating things, which is a win. You can do more deals. And then 2, life is not all about how much money you're making. If you can feel really good about getting a tenant in a space that works for them and they're paying a rent that works for their business, now you have a friend for the rest of your life. And that's incredibly valuable. And a lot of us in the development world, when we look back on our career, it'll be more about the friends we made during that time and not all about did we make every dollar. Although to your point, I think there's a financial reason to do this as well.
So how critical in all of that is understanding, because when you're talking about making every dollar that you can, when you're talking about maximization, I think you also have to be talking in parallel about kind of an ideal state. So how critical is knowing what, enough is for you as the landlord, for you as the developer, for you. So you can say, listen, this is, yes, I could make $24.75 per square foot, but 20 is good, and it gets me done, and it gets me a friend.
Yeah. Well, every developer is different and has a different calculation. I'll just say the big developers are the smartest. They've got the most experience and bandwidth to do special things, and they are doing this. So the people who've learned for 20 or 30 years, through experience, good and bad, are doing exactly what I'm talking about. I could name a few people in town. The mid-level folks who are doing one project here, maybe one project in Denver and one project in DC, are the people I see screw it up. And they're the ones that always have empty retail space and aren't chasing the right tenant. They're taking whatever the easiest tenant is, who's willing to pay the most in rent. And in the end, they're the ones who lose. So my advice would be let's learn from the big guys who've already learned and who treat their retail tenants like an amenity and not like a moneymaker.
So maybe that answers the question, but what's one thing, and again, thinking less about developers and less about folks in the industry, what's one thing you wish more people out in the community, be it specific and focused to Raleigh or on a wider stage, what's one thing you wish more folks understood about retail? And again, that can be as an operator or as a developer?
Yeah, I'll speak from it as an operator. I wish people knew how hard of a business it was. And again, I've been in charge or been involved with businesses that have lost money, and that's clearly the hardest. But even my businesses that make money, that is so much harder than development. No question. And it can come, it's as simple as hours in dealing with people. Our restaurants are open till 11 or 12 at night. Even if we're not there anymore, we have to manage the people that are there. Then there are all these interactions. A certain number of customers are not going to be happy. A certain number of people are having a bad day. A certain number of our employees are going to have a bad day. And we have to deal with all of that. So even when we're making really good money, it's a hard job. And so in exchange, retailers need to make good money to continue doing it. And so from the developer's perspective, you want your retailer to be killing it, because then they'll stay there and deal with the negatives of the business, the hours, all the hassles, because they're making good money. And I think a lot of times the opposite is the truth. Developers care about themselves making money and not about the retailers making money, and sort of think of the real retailers, as the guy who gets, I don't want to use bad language, but whatever gets, sort of left to eat scraps or whatever.
Short end of the stick.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. And really we should think about the opposite. We need our real retailers to be doing great in exchange for all the hassle they deal with.
I like it. What about here in Raleigh? Is there something, or what makes retail in Raleigh unique, do you think?
Okay. So, I'm a downtown Raleigh guy. And so that's what I'll speak to. And what's interesting to me is how little national retail we have in downtown. And I think that's a really good thing from a restaurant perspective. We have local restaurants that are mostly chef driven, and that's a really positive thing. It's not a chain corporate experience in downtown. I do think, and I've heard this argument from people, that having some national retailers like clothing stores, in Anthropologie, that kind of thing, we have in Urban Outfitters, a little more than that might be good for getting folks downtown for the first time. They would come to that, they would see other things, and then come downtown, more because of that. But I think our unique-ish thing now compared to other downtown areas is that we don't have the national chains. And I think most of us think that's a good thing. And the question is whether it really is a good thing or not.
So then what do you say to, there's potentially an argument about existing space versus new space. And, if you're looking at, and I know, you've looked at the numbers on a new development, right, where construction costs are. So to say, okay, well, if I'm building this new space, my costs are X dollars a square foot. And to the rent question, again, to back into a yield on those dollars spent, the higher the rent, the better your yield, the better you're doing. And if you're at a point where a new building, no matter what it is, the cost is way up here, and the appropriate rents are, $40, $45, there aren't a whole lot of non-national groups that can float that bill. Or if you've got a bunch of space, how many local operators need large spaces? And so there becomes a question of, can that be done well with new space?
Right. It's a challenge. I'll just say that the folks that have the money to get the exact tenant they want, a Fenton in Cary, for example, they are getting the local chef-driven restaurant by giving them more TI and by charging them less rent. But they're doing it the way we're talking about. The landlords who are capable of doing it the way they want to are going after the local chef-driven restaurants, and they are getting by giving them more TI and charging them less rent. There are some folks who won't be able to do that, as you're suggesting. I still think, though, the smarter thing to do is to raise the rent by 50 cents a square foot on the floors above them and give the retailer a break in exchange for, providing a service for the building. So I understand that concern that you're saying. And I think if I'm doing that project, I'm reworking the pro forma so the numbers still work, but so that the rent is shifted.
Right. I mean, there's, I guess to your point, there's leverage, right? A 20% savings on rent on the first floor in a 6-story building is a 4% increase on the other 5 floors. And
Yeah.
what about neighborhood involvement and engagement, right? So you're downtown, you're obviously right in the thick of things. You've mentioned some of the challenges that can come on the personal front with people. I mean, people are complicated. And so dealing with people, but what else can you speak to on the neighborhood and engagement perspective?
Yeah. I mean, from a business perspective, the neighborhood is everything. You need the customers to be coming from the neighborhood to have any type of retail business work. And so from our perspective, we're connecting with the neighborhood all the time through events. We're making sure the neighbors are happy. And when there's a problem, we're jumping on it. I think that is the right approach. And that takes time because you need to meet people, and it's a hassle because sometimes people aren't happy with you. But long term, your business will do better. If you don't do that from a retailer or even a development perspective, it can create a lot of headaches long term. From a retail, it's quite simple. You'll lose customers, and you normally don't just lose one customer. You normally use that customer and all their friends. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge problem when somebody's not happy with you. And then on a development perspective, same thing. Like if people are not happy with your development or there's a bad vibe around it, it will impact business in the rents you can get. And so I think the right thing to do is be heavily engaged with the neighborhood. Sometimes that doesn't mean giving in to everything the neighborhood wants. For example, at Trophy Brewing, I think the neighbors across the street would prefer we closed at 9 p.m., right? Well, that doesn't really work for our model, but we start moving people inside at 9 p.m., that kind of thing, to bring the volume down. And then really by 10:30, 11, there's nobody outside and the volume's really low for the neighbors. So that's the kind of thing you got to meet in the middle, have the conversations, and in the end, your business will be more successful because of it.
So you grew up here, you've got roots in the neighborhood, and I think that pays dividends, right? Having those relationships, understanding, being part of the fabric of the community. And then as you do the business, right, that increases. But you got a good place to start. What if you were picked up and dropped into, I don't know, pick some comparable city that you've never been in? What would be the first thing, again, as a developer or retailer operator, what would be the first thing that you would focus on to start charting that course of neighborhood engagement?
Yeah. And I did grow up here, and it does really help. I'd say it's 90% positive that I grew up here. There's a 10% of, things that aren't as positive.
Can't be 100%, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the first thing is you need to provide amenity to the neighborhood. You need to make the neighbors' lives better than they are now. And I think by, for us in the brewery, we have, having a local brewery in the neighborhood is generally a positive thing. Whatever your concept is, make it be positive. Same thing with a development. A lot of neighbors are going to look at a development as a negative, even when development's a positive thing generally. So what can you do with your development that will help the neighbors who even may not like your development? I see a lot of big apartment projects now making sure they connect to the bike lane infrastructure and the sidewalk infrastructure in town. That makes a lot of sense. Doing things like that, getting retail tenants in the retail space that make the residents nearby's life a lot easier. Do that kind of thing and you will win long term.
Is there anything, kind of as we start to wrap up a little bit, is there anything that you wish I'd asked but didn't?
No, I was just going to reiterate how hard being in the retail business is. And actually the brewing business, the one I'm in, is probably one of the more fun, easy ones. And most retail businesses are all work and very little fun. And so
who's got it the hardest?
I mean, they're all hard. Like even the clothing store that closes at 6 p.m., you're still Saturdays and Sundays managing inventory the right way. Cash flow is always hard. Even that's hard. definitely the restaurant business and the hours and the margins around that are hard. And I just think we need to be more sympathetic to the folks in the retail world and make sure that their businesses can make money. And from the development side, that normally means reducing the rent.
So what is it, is there kind of low hanging fruit ways to make either that struggle and hardship more evident and understood by the community, or the flip side, is there a way to, and again, rent aside maybe, but is there a way to help reduce the pain on these businesses?
No, I think the way to reduce the pain is make sure they're making money. If you're making money, you can deal with the hardships. But if you're not, it's really even harder. And so, if landlords get invested in making sure their tenants do well, either by driving traffic their way or reducing their expenses through rent, I think those are the two biggest ones.
Awesome. And then on the kind of the tail end of this is, what would you recommend somebody, that hears you talking about this, that, obviously we all have our experiences with local retail and downtown Raleigh. What is something you would recommend that we go out and do, or kind of what's a good next step, do you think?
Good question. I think the main thing is to support your local retailers. From a development perspective, I do really like having retail on the first floor of developments, even when we're 2 or 3 blocks off the beaten path. And so, I'm a big supporter of that when it comes to city requirements, but we need to support those places, and we need landlords to be friendly to those places too. So that's sort of the big takeaway. I have a couple community things I'd like to mention too.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So in Raleigh, we're working on a couple projects now. One that the city council is already on, and it's I think going to be the biggest transformation for Raleigh in a long time, and that is fare-free bus service. So the city council made our bus service free during the pandemic because they didn't want people exchanging money with germs on it. And in exchange, or in the end, it had this incredible impact of giving our essential workers basically a stimulus, and it was targeted at essential workers who didn't have a car. Well, that was during the pandemic. Our council has agreed to keep the buses free for another year, and now you have all these other benefits since the pandemic is ending. More people will ride because there's less barrier to entry. You don't need $1.25. Most of us don't even carry that anymore. If more people are riding, you have less congestions on the road. We become a greener city. Federal funding is actually tied to ridership. We could get more federal funding because more people are riding because it's free, and potentially connect the dots financially. So that's one big thing in Raleigh. I would like to encourage all the listeners to advocate for fare-free bus service. It could also make downtown much more accessible. Working downtown can be hard because of parking. If you could ride the bus easily to work, even if there's not a bus stop near your house, if you sort of drive to the bus stop near your house, park there and ride in, that would make downtown a much more attractive place and easier to work. The second thing is downtown Raleigh has 2 highways running through the middle of it, Dawson Street and McDowell Street. Cars are cutting through town, not going to town. 40% of the cars that cross the belt line at South Saunders cross it on Capitol. That 40% should be going around town on the belt line and not cutting through town. Those 2 highways create a major barrier for downtown, a safety barrier. It is uncomfortable to cross them walking. It breaks up retail districts. It breaks up the walkability of downtown. In fact, we've even had people hit and killed, a couple of people in the last couple of years. The solution, I think, is to slow those roads down from 35 miles per hour to 25 or 30, to take them down from 3 or 4 lanes to 2 lanes, adding bike lanes and parking. Just those few things, I think, would get that 40% going around town and make downtown much more connected instead of broken in half. This, unfortunately, is not a city council issue. our city council is responsive to city issues like this. This is a state DOT issue because these are state roads. And one problem is the state DOT, leadership doesn't really pay attention to small rehab projects or, small projects like this. They're more paying attention. How do we get to Emerald Isle faster versus, how do we slow down McDowell and Dawson? So, but we are working on a campaign to make these changes to these roads. This is a 5-year project, not a 2-year project. But in the end, I think the impact it could have on downtown Raleigh would be huge. And if you're not in downtown Raleigh, most downtowns have roads like this breaking up downtown. So this issue is probably relevant to where you are too.
So a couple questions on that. One, do you know, is there a clear path or strategy to, I don't know if it's reverting ownership from NCDOT to the city level? I mean, is there a path to that on the books, so to speak? I mean, I don't know if it's a legal thing or just a precedent to how does this happen?
Yeah, short answer is not, it's not possible. So like several years of city leadership have looked into this for these 2 roads and other roads. And the state just doesn't give up control of their roads because it makes it easier for them to do what they want there. So that's not possible. So it's really working with the state to make these changes. And occasionally you'll see this where the state will come in and really make upgrades to an existing road for the modern times. And that's what needs to happen here. But you got to have DOT leadership get interested in it and get focused on it. And that's what we're working on now.
Interesting. Okay. And then on the buses, so this is actually an issue. I don't know, you and I had this conversation. This is an issue I've come around significantly on. So the fiscal conservative in me says, well, if this is a bus system, it should be performing, and it should be you should be serving the areas that are doing well, and you should be not sending a bus an hour north, just to pick up 2 people. There's 10 people over here that you can pick up, or increase frequency by adjusting. And so I struggle, and I'm learning about the reasons and the equity issues behind, okay, well, maybe this isn't, but these are the people that need it more. This, maybe there's less riders over here, but again, the need, and it's critical that that you have service to these areas. And then there's the other piece to me is, how do you measure performance of a system like a bus system without having tied to some sort of metric like revenue? And I think ridership is an answer to that. But the real thing, and hearing you and talking to you about this in the past, one of the things I think has kind of turned my opinion on it, and having ridden the bus and having more often than not be able to utilize the bus system because it comes every 45 minutes or an hour, because it doesn't go, it takes me 25 minutes to get to what I can drive in 10. I've struggled with this, but then I think, and especially in the last year and a half, we've seen another citywide network that has become increasingly important and valued and beneficial that is 100% free, and that's our park system, right? Yeah. So if you had to pay $1.25 to get on the Greenway, people would be up in arms. I mean, you'd go berserk. And so to me, again, is this a utility? Is this a service on many levels, not just a direct service, as you mentioned, but a congestion reducing service, a greenhouse gas reducing service, all of these things where we as a city could rally behind that and say, like, listen, yes, it's, maybe I don't use it, but it's a service to me that everybody else does, or maybe it's just a service. And then my question is, how much, money, back to getting everything you can out of an asset, and how much money are we leaving on the table because of our park system? We're not charging for parks, right? And is that like 20 times the size of what we lose by going fare free on buses? I'd be interested to know what that comparison is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Or maybe there's some other comparison that's not parks, it's something else. But to me, this is a service.
No, I think that's a great comparison. And it's also the same comparison on the equity issue. Like, we all believe that no matter how much money you have, you should be able to go to a park with your kids for free. It's just like a given, right?
Right.
In some ways, you should look at it the same, like you should be able to go downtown, go to your job for free. And, like you shouldn't, have to pay $225 a day to go to your $12 an hour job downtown. It just,
or $5,000 a year, not whatever the average annual ownership of a car is, right? The barriers to entry access.
Yeah, exactly. But I like your train of thought because there's so many positives to this. Even the fiscal conservative can get behind this. In the, socially progressive, person like myself, can champion it as well. And so in terms of numbers, it is so little money that comes in from fares. It's striking. People think about how much money it must be because it's really expensive to operate the bus system. Yeah. It is expensive to operate the bus system. Fare revenue, though, is only $3 million a year. This is pre-pandemic. The cost to collect fare in other similar cities, we haven't done the study in Raleigh, but we assume it's the same in Raleigh, is 40% of the fares. So now you're down to 60% of 3 million, which is 1.8. That is a half-cent, equivalent to a half-cent tax increase in Raleigh. On a $300,000 home, or let's say a $500,000 home, because prices are increasing so much here, that's $25 a year, for the bus system to be free. Everybody could ride the bus 10 times and get that value of it. And then the people who need it the most, would get way more value out of it than that. So the numbers are just so simple. And I'll just say this, we are very lucky to live in a place where our city council gets it. Not that they're going to champion every equity issue, because you can't afford to do that. But on the really easy ones like this, where the numbers just are so simple, they're on it. So cool. We just have to provide them the cover to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's right. When you talk right, when it's giving something away for free, I think it's easy to freak out. So why are we just giving it away? But right, $25 a year on the average, home.
Yeah. It's just such a simple equation. And then, we talked about federal funding, but you may not have to even increase the taxes. If ridership increases enough, you get more federal funding because of that. That may connect the dots right there. So
I like it. Well, this is awesome. I appreciate your time. Any final thoughts or?
No. Just thanks for, I have strong opinions on a few issues, and I just really appreciate you reaching out and letting me voice those. And I know other people have different opinions, and sort of all good. And you're doing such a great job sort of listening to everybody.
I appreciate it. Happy to do it. Always good to catch up, and best of luck on everything. And we'll be talking soon.
Sounds great. See you,
Thanks,
Jed.
sir. Bye.
I appreciate David taking the time to share his story with me, given all that he has going on. Since recording this episode, he has closed on the acquisition of 801 West Morgan Street, a mixed-use building in partnership with Loden Properties, and announced the name of his latest project, Young Hearts Distilling, both in downtown Raleigh. If you want to find out more about David, I will include links to his company websites and social media accounts in the show notes below. As always, I am grateful that you have chosen to share this time with me. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions about Dirt NC or anything land use related, you can find me on Twitter at OakCityCRE, and if you want a simple and straight to the point update on Raleigh commercial development, you can subscribe to the Top 5, my free weekly newsletter at www.oakcitycre.com. Until next time, thank you